Since the invention of space ice cream in 1974, practically everyone at one time or another has probably thought about dining in space. So 47 years later, Disney went right ahead and made that possible. And that's what this Disfarers episode is all about. Epcot's space-themed restaurant, Space 220. There'll be explanations about the restaurant's connection to the extinct Horizons attraction, the delays in opening, and some keen Imagineering insights into its design. What surprisingly won't be covered is much of the actual food, not only because I'm not a culinary expert and the fact that food is subjective, but because Space 220 changes its menu twice a year, and I don't want to immediately date an episode. So let's jettison the logo out of frame here and rock it into what Disney refers to as the height of dining.
I must scream into the world my excitement from the top of someplace very high.
You may in fact be wondering what the 220 means in Space 220, and I couldn't blame you. It was the first thing I looked up after getting my first reservation. And I'm not going to leave it as some big reveal at the end of the episode. The 220 is in the name because the restaurant is 220 miles above the Earth. That's 355 kilometers for those overseas. And this is the actual general distance of the very real International Space Station above the Earth, so that's pretty neat. And what's kind of weird is that even though the Kennedy Space Center is essentially down the road from Orlando, Disney Imagineers did not consult with NASA in any way in regards to the dining area. Not even to hear their input or opinions, which displays a high level of confidence in what they put together. However, Seth Rose, a Disney spokesperson, revealed that Disney did consult with NASA engineers in regards to what the space elevator should look like and how it would operate if real, as well as how to give the best impression to riders that they were on such an off-worldly conveyance. Disney Imagineers also questioned NASA about what the video projections above and below should look like within the elevator before creating the attraction. Even though I'm gonna go into the elevator more in just a bit, I just wanted to put out there that most of Space 220 and most of the scientific calculations within were designed and conceptualized by Disney Imagineers. They really deserve their due on this one, so there they have it. Now, as far as the location of Space 220, because I couldn't find it when it first opened, it's with/beside/in Mission Space. It's essentially within the same building as the attraction. You have to walk into the circular, cosmically architectural thoroughfare. And I have to mention this because they continually do renovations and construction out front, so people don't always know where to find the place. Mission Space isn't exactly the most popular attraction these days, so even with the sign, people don't always know where it is.
Lost.
The Space 220 restaurant was announced at the 2017 D23 Expo. And this really was one of the most revealing D23 Expos. I mean, that year they revealed a model of Galaxy's Edge, Mickey and Minnie's Runaway Railway, Toy Story Land, Guardians of the Galaxy Cosmic Rewind, Remy's Ratatouille Adventure, Mission Space's Green Mission, the Tron Coaster attraction coming to the Magic Kingdom, the Riviera Resort, the Star Wars Galactic Star Cruiser Halcyon Hotel, the Skyliner, and even amid all of this, people still kept the space restaurant on their radar. And it's really not too tough to understand why. Honestly, besides just sounding utterly captivating, this corner of Epcot's future world east, now known as World Discovery since 2022, has been missing a place to sit and eat since the closure of Odyssey in 1994. And on paper, it makes a lot of sense. Space 220 is essentially a space-themed version of the Coral Reef concept, which is just on the opposite side of Spaceship Earth. It's a bit of the old yet new, and it just feels like a natural idea for Disney to create. There were some long and weird delays with opening Space 220. Not to put too fine a point on it, but they are rumored to all be contributed to the COVID-19 pandemic. But this doesn't ring exactly true. I mean, construction was initially slated to be done in late 2019. However, the original executive chef, Theo Schoenegger, was suddenly off the project in November of 2019. And he seemed like a good fit. Theo here was the executive chef at Maria and Enzo's Ristorante at Disney Springs, which also meant he would have been under the same Patina restaurant group umbrella, which I'll go over in just a few moments. But he apparently booked it out of Florida for one reason or another, back to where he once worked at Sinatra, a 4-star restaurant out at the Wynn Resort in Las Vegas, just a few weeks before Space 220's slated opening. One of the reasons for his departure may have been that the restaurants in Disney Springs were intended to create an elevated food district with high hopes for Michelin stars and what have you. However, only Morimoto Asia and the Polite Pig have won Michelin plates, which which isn't too shabby if you ask anyone in that world, but no stars were handed out, and as time goes on, it looks less and less likely to occur for any restaurant at Disney Springs. Though I was recently told that Disney got their first Michelin star over at Victoria and Albert's, which is really amazing. Nevertheless, the reviews among the majority of Disney Springs restaurants continually fail to earn high ratings among customers, including Maria and Enzo's Ristorante. Mostly 3-point-somethings out of 5s, and Theo here is actually from Italy, so maybe he just missed making dishes from his homeland while listening to Sinatra.
And even when I'm old and gray.
The installation of the extra-large glass for Space 220's dining room was purported to have been one of the issues for the initial delays as well. Though no exact details emerged, it has been roundly agreed to be 100% resolved long before the restaurant's opening. So, after 2019, Disney said they would be opening Space 220 on February 2020, which was a really cool idea because it would have meant Space 220 was going to open with a 220 date. It could have really turned the whole chef problem and glass problems around into a positive. But again, Space 220 didn't open. And then, in March of 2020, the COVID shutdowns began. So there was an issue with opening the restaurant for months before COVID ever became a worldwide issue. Somewhere in the midst of this short miasmic era, Marc Couchet was handed the honor of being Space 220's original executive chef, a well-rounded German-born chef who had spent a lot of time in the Florida area, who has a predilection and talent for preparing fish, and is an overall true culinary artist. Seriously, I've watched videos of him talking about food, and his passion for preparing and concocting dishes is abundantly apparent. He never appears comfortable in front of a camera though, so don't let the images throw you. So with an executive chef secured, the construction finally completed, and the COVID pandemic passed, Space 220 was finally able to open its doors to the public on September 20th, 2021. So there was some kind of a 20 in there. As with most things that are new at Disney, there are aspects that need to be gracefully ironed out, and that sometimes takes time. As it currently is, guests walk up to the restaurant entrance the same way they do Mission Space, except you walk to the right instead of the left. And I don't mean to be mean, but things are pretty wonky at the outset of the dining experience. First off, there's nowhere near enough room to sit after you give your name at the first front desk. Also, there are people that naturally try to get a table by going up to the restaurant's counter because they couldn't wrangle a reservation. Getting a reservation here is still incredibly difficult. So, everyone is essentially going to be told to wait, except if you want to be seated at Space 220's lounge, which is a topic consisting of some static. Apparently, the lounge is very popular. So popular that Disney now refuses to allow lounge seating without a reservation. So there's no going up to the front desk and waiting if you're only interested in the lounge, which really upsets some people. So, because of the lack of seating outside, people just drop themselves to the ground. Like a lot of people. Off-putting even. It's odd and should have been improved immediately, yet the process still continues years later. The fact that people are literally sitting down on the earth so they can be elegantly seated to dine amid the stars is a discouraging contrast. But fortunately, things gradually improve once your name is called. Guests are brought into an indoor waiting area that wasn't so much reimagined as rethemed from whatever was here before, then handed passes to get on their elevator and told to wait in yet another line. I can imagine Disney's original Imagineers seeing this and shaking their heads. It's a poorly laid out arrangement, with guests staring at mostly empty seats across the way, while people are outside waiting on the ground just outside. The whole arrangement still needs work, but everything drastically improves from here on out. Okay, so the time you go to Space 220 is extremely relevant to your experience. Space 220, as I've said, takes place upon a space station. That means that there are daytime and evening views of Earth. It all depends on what time you visit. This first becomes relevant as you board the Stellervator, which despite the outmoded sort of pun, is a truly fantastic experience. After waiting for your name to be called outside, getting your pass key, waiting for your pass key to be called, and then that pass key being called, you get to board the Stellervator, moving into an interesting circular room. Once the doors close, the elevator begins its ascent. The circular viewports, both above and below, open, and the situation becomes increasingly surreal, allowing guests to look up and down as they feel themselves elevated to the reaches of space. Like I mentioned, NASA was consulted about this before Disney Imagineers went ahead and created it. Now, the viewports above and below are obviously projections. However, the weather conditions and time of day match what the real weather conditions are at Epcot. It's an actual live feed simulation derived from meteorological satellites, including the Geostationary Operational Environmental Satellite Program operated by NASA and the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. So, a rainy day will appear rainy, and a clear night sky will be just that. Another fun aspect is that the sequence actually departs from Epcot, taking guests 220 miles up to the Centauri space station. And the use of Centauri is actually a cleverly shrouded tribute to the extinct attraction Horizons, which closed in 1999. It was also located in what was once the eastern side of Future World. In fact, the same location as where Space 220 is today. The Horizons attraction had a space station called Brava Centauri, where guests got to see what life would be like upon a space station, witnessing things as how people would exercise and celebrate birthdays. Anyways, this whole Stellervator concept originated from Soviet-era rocket scientist Konstantin Tsiolkovsky, a pioneer in astronautics who went on to develop the multi-stage rocket fueled by liquid oxygen and liquid hydrogen. His contribution to space travel didn't end there, but I don't want to deviate too far from Space 220. Suffice it to say that Tsiolkovsky was brilliant. And he was the first to propose the notion of a space elevator in 1895 after being inspired by the then new Eiffel Tower. Since then, the idea was taken up by many other engineers. Yuri N. Nartsatanov developed the idea further in 1960 with introducing a counterweight system to keep the cable over the same spot on Earth, as well as further hone such a cable's necessities, such as requiring a thinner cable at ground level that thickened as it reached geostationary orbit. In 1966, 4 American engineers reinvented the concept and called it the Skyhook, and the concept has really developed from there. So much so that in 2019, the International Academy of Astronautics published a report after assessing the development of such a space elevator, and have concluded that it's not only feasible, but that the possible reality of one is nearer than most would think. Anywho, Space 220's Stellervator is a fairly quick, fun, simulated experience transporting guests to the dining area, and it's done really well. You almost forget you're there to eat because it feels as though you're in the middle of another awesome Disney attraction, given the amount of effort put into the effects and theming. After finishing the Stellervator experience, guests are brought past these spinning modules of fresh ingredients like something out of 2001: A Space Odyssey. This place is called the Growth Zone, with items that will be found on the menu, and it's really based on the vegetable production system, otherwise known as Veggie, that actually exists in real space stations, including the International Space Station. It's utilized not only for feeding and self-sufficient needs, but also as a means of recreational gardening for astronauts. Overall, it's a low-maintenance, low-power, and low-launch mass project regarding the research on growing crops in zero gravity, and it's proving to be quite beneficial in learning as to how plants can grow in a weightless environment and the best processes to use in efficiently growing crops in space. Crops being tested right now include cabbage, lettuce, and mizuna. Beyond the vegetable production system is yet another circular area containing wine bottles, and though this area is for visually conveying that wine is an option while dining, rather than an actual storage area for wine, it's still an interesting sight and conceptualization. And I can't blame them for the faux display. I mean, Space 220 boasts having over 1,000 bottles of the world's finest wines. It makes sense to have some sort of display, seeing as how they couldn't simply showcase their racks of wine in a typical restaurant fashion. And then finally, after all of the interstellar traveling, guests reach the dining room of the space station, set alongside the celestial panoramic view of Earth and its surrounding space. This is a 250-foot digital screen that practically demands the attention of anyone who catches sight of it. Again, 220 miles up. If you pay attention, you get to see some really interesting things. There's an X-2 deep space shuttle from Mission Space, astronauts doing all kinds of fun antics. There's a mock lightsaber duel. Then there's dogs, a Star Wars X-Wing, which I found delightfully surprising. And there's other space stations, and a solar-paneled satellite strongly reminiscent of NASA's James Webb Space Telescope, which conducts infrared astronomy, surpassing the Hubble Space Telescope. And it may seem odd for these people in spacesuits messing around and working and dogs floating about. However, that's because Disney doesn't adequately explain that there's actually a fictional space resort at the top of the space station you're on. Because the Stellervator is tethered to Earth, the Earth does not rotate while dining at Space 220, but is rather keeping pace with the rotation of the planet. So instead, there's an altering view of light and darkness as the sun travels across the globe. So depending on when you're eating, the perspective of the Earth's lighting shifts. If you're able to catch a reservation at sundown, you get to watch the sun's light gently fade before your eyes, and see lights flicker on across the continent as they adjust to the night conditions. I've heard complaints that the stars don't move across the sky, which is a valid comment, and I'm not sure if Disney has an explanation for this. It's possible the stars do move, but at such a slow rate it's impossible to tell over the course of a meal. Or, it's possibly an oversight and they should have consulted with NASA on the dining room. I'm not sure on that one. Other nice touches include the warning signs in the event of the loss of gravity and the astronaut restroom decals. And if you check out the floor, Imagineer Zach Ridley revealed that it was inspired by Spaceship Earth's Alakabon panels, which is another nice subtle feature I never would have noticed if it hadn't been pointed out to me.
It's fascinating, isn't it?
As I mentioned, Space 220 is run by the Patina Restaurant Group, which consequently also runs Tutto Italia and Via Napoli at the Italy Pavilion at Epcot. And Morimoto Asia, Enzo's Hideaway, Maria and Enzo's, Pizza Point, and the Edison at Disney Springs, with lots of other restaurants in New York, Boston, Jersey, Southern California, including Los Angeles, and even Disneyland with Taqueria, Napolini Pizza, and Tortilla Joe's. Which, I have to say, many of the restaurants I listed have won tons of awards, and the ones I've been to on that list have all been great, except for Tortilla Joe's. That one was fairly meh for me. But that one exception aside, the Patina Restaurant Group has an exceptional ability of coalescing food, culture, and environment into an amazing dining experience. Through the creative usage of art and scenery, they really connect with the culinary regions they showcase, all while delivering high-caliber food and service. But there's no precedent for dining in space, so certain liberties had to be taken. And the mood for Space 220 is set to the music of what's known as Hearts of Space. I've never really listened to it until researching Space 220, but now it's in my rotation of background music for while I'm working, especially at night. But like I said, I'm not going to get into any specifics in regards to options with the food. However, it's all high-end American-based cuisine. I remember going on the Galactic Star Cruiser and they had this amazing fusion of Indian and pizza, but you're not going to run into any cross-cultural fusion here, or blue shrimp for that matter. It's for a typical American palate. The dishes all have space-themed pun names, but it's all food Americans are familiar with, so something like Space Greens really means salad. It's a prefix menu of contemporary items consisting of 2 courses during lunch and 3 courses for dinner, which I personally enjoy. It's like I'm here, I'm in, I'm paying the same no matter what, so I can just get whatever I want. The moon plates are a really great touch too, and my family wanted to buy them, but apparently they're not for sale, nor is there any kind of Space 220 gift shop to purchase them from either. I had to stop my mother from stealing one for my child, but that's another subject altogether. Larceny aside, there's also a whole bunch of alcoholic and non-alcoholic drinks that are called atmospheric spirits that also change with the menu twice a year, by the way. Like the Black Hole Fashioned and Space Age Mule. My family actually tried the Moon Rocks, which is a concoction of lemon juice, blue cotton candy syrup, Sprite, pineapple juice, and the Pop Rocks. You'd think it would all be a bit too much, but it was actually pretty balanced and tasty, and the Pop Rocks with Sprite was just pressurized carbon dioxide electric fun. And it may be the 20th century kid in me, but I really feel like they should always have Tang on their menu. And that's not unprecedented. They've had drinks with Tang on and off in the past.
Launch your day with the goodness of Tang.
Leaving Space 220 is the exact same process as getting there, but in reverse, I guess. So you get to ride the Stellervator back down to Epcot. The place is like 2 rides in one. In any case, with 350 seats, Space 220 fits a niche that was really missing, and it has the perfect home in Epcot. Like any Disney restaurant, there are people in every imaginable camp with opinions on the food and pricing. But keep in mind that Space 220 is more than a restaurant. It's a one-of-a-kind experience. And with that said, and taking everything mentioned in this episode into consideration, it's worth checking out, at least once. Or at least until someone builds that real space elevator and people can start actually dining in space stations. But until then, there's Disney's Space 220 simulation. Thanks for watching and listening. Disfarers out.